The next bill up for consideration is number 84 on general orders, House File 90. Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can't believe we're finally here. Before you is House File 90, the Elder Care and Vulnerable Adult Protection Act. For more than 2.5 years, we've been working with consumer advocates, families, care providers, state officials, and others on legislation to protect our seniors and our most vulnerable in the state of Minnesota. That hard work led to a bill of which Minnesotans can be truly proud. This is a bipartisan bill that gives elderly and vulnerable adults the consumer protections that they deserve. This brings Minnesota in line with the rest of the country in licensing our assisted living facilities. Caring for our seniors and our most vulnerable must be a top priority. The genesis of this bill started way back in our Aging and Long-Term Care Committee, and the Department of Health Assistant Commissioner Gil Acevedo told us of the thousands of reports of abuse, maltreatment, and neglect that were going uninvestigated in our nursing homes and our senior living. That led to the Office of the Health Facility Complaints being audited and the legislative auditor coming back with a huge book of solutions and how we could fix that. It's been over 2 years that the stakeholder groups have been meeting to fix the issues and help our most vulnerable. Long hours into the night, and they finally came to a resolution early Mother's Day morning. During this time, Senator Nelson lost her father to Alzheimer's. Also, Senator Pappas lost her mother to Alzheimer's. And I also lost my mother to Alzheimer's. All of them living in a long-term care facility. I have to give credit to the Department of Health Commissioner Jan Malcolm. She really spearheaded this issue that we started. She put into close to 1,000 hours on just this issue. A big thank you to the Commissioner. We've been through a ton of committee hearings with the Commissioner and myself, and our last stop was Senator Rosen's Finance Committee last night. Commissioner Malcolm sat next to me, eager to get this signature piece through to its last stop, which is here, and then to be signed by the governor. But shortly after our bill's last stop last night, in the last days of session, Commissioner Malcolm's own father passed away while he was living in an assisted living. So Commissioner Malcolm, I know that your father is very, very proud of you. So please keep her in your prayers tonight. There's so many people to thank on this bill. First, my Family Care and Aging Committee. Thank you for sticking with me through all of this. My co-authors, Senator Eakin, Senator Rude, Senator Ralph, and Senator Abler. I'd also like to thank Senator Rosen and Benson for their guidance and resource blessings. And also Senator Dibble, it has been a pleasure to work with you through this process. Also Representative Schultz in the House for shepherding the bill in the other body. Also, Senate Counsel Mr. Monahan for his endless hours and 52 rewrites and 73 delete all amendments. And also my Girl Squad of Larissa Fisher, Jessica Young, and Rachel Grooms. But most importantly, I'd like to thank the stakeholders. Some are here today in the chamber for the passion in getting this monumental legislation done. AARP, Leading Age Minnesota, Care Providers of Minnesota, Elder Voices Family Advocates, the Board of Aging, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and other various departments. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are finally here. And now to the bill. I'm going to give the shortest version I can, because it took me 2 years, Bobby Joe. Anyway, House File 90 has a lot of consumer protections in it, starting with Article 1, assisted living licensure. That was the biggest lift for all of us. So getting assisted living licensure done, we were the only state in the country who didn't have licensure yet. So getting all of the stakeholders together and getting a framework around how the Department of Health can have regulatory authority over our assisted living was a big, big agreement. Also in Article 2, dementia care services for the assisted living. This article outlines additional requirements for assisted living facilities with dementia care. Article 3 is consumer protection. Many, many consumer protections in here, from arbitrary termination, protections against that, retaliations prohibited, maltreatment compensation fund, electronic monitoring, the I'm OK checks, and protections for residents on the elderly waiver programs. We've also added funds for long-term care ombudsmen. We had the lowest ratio of ombudsmen to residents in Minnesota, and we've increased that by adding 16 more long-term care ombudsmen in the state. And with that, I ask for a green vote. I think we have a couple of amendments, Mr. President, but thank you to everybody here in the chamber for all of your help with this bill. It's big and it's good, and thank you.
Discussion on House File 90. Senator Marty.
Mr. President, I have the A5 amendment at the desk.
Senator Marty offers the A5 amendment. The Secretary will read the amendment.
Senator Marty moves to amend House File Number 90 down official engrossment as follows, page 7, line 5. This is the A5 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. This is a technical amendment. I've checked it through with Senator Housley, and she's checked with the advocates as well. It simply deals with a conflicting definition where I'm OK check services were counted as both assisted living services and supportive services. And this fixes the bill. There should be no controversy over it. I urge your support.
Discussion on the amendment, Senator Housley.
Mr. President, I will take this as a friendly amendment. We went over this last night in Finance Committee, and all the stakeholders agree.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Further discussion on the bill, Senator Housley.
Mr. President, I have the A50 amendment.
Senator Housley offers the A50 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Housley moves to amend House File Number 90 down official engrossment as follows, page 148, delete section 26 is the A50 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. This was just an error that was caught by the Department of Health in section 26. There's a 30-day conflict in language, so they just pulled it out, and it has been agreed upon.
Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Further discussion on House File 90. Senator Benson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A6 amendment.
Senator Benson offers the A6 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Benson moves to amend House File Number 90 down official engrossment as follows, page 152 after line 18. This is the A6 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Benson.
Mr. President and members, this is a correction. It inserts language inadvertently omitted in a Finance Committee amendment. It gives direction on how to allocate an appropriation already included in the bill. It has been vetted by the stakeholders, and there is agreement.
Discussion on the A6 amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Further discussion on House File 90. Senator Latz.
Mr. President, I have the A7 amendment.
Senator Latz offers the A7 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Latz moves to amend House File Number 90 down official engrossment as follows, page 80, delete section 31 and insert, this is the A7 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. The A7 amendment would prohibit the use of forced arbitration clauses in the contracts between the residents of the assisted living facilities and the facility operator owner themselves. A forced arbitration provision is one in which a person, when they sign the contract to live in a facility, would give up voluntarily all of their rights to private lawsuits and instead could be required to take any complaints or disputes into an arbitration situation. They could not file a private lawsuit. And I say voluntarily, but the fact is I would anticipate that most, if not all, facilities will include these arbitration provisions in their contracts because it's in their financial best interests to avoid going to court and to force residents into a forum that is not only less costly but potentially less favorable to the complainants who have a problem. For example, if they fall and hurt themselves, or fall and severely hurt themselves, or if they fall and die. They would not be able to sue the facility for negligence, for example, for failing to monitor them, failing to put a railing up on their bed, if they've got poor training of staff, and so on, who didn't do their job right in monitoring or checking on the resident. So it really is unfair, in my judgment, to include a forced arbitration provision. Now, the current bill has in it language which does say that the contract can't include a choice of law or choice of venue provision, which means that the facility can't say all disputes are going to be resolved under the laws of the state of Delaware. It will have to be Minnesota, and the contract must adhere to Minnesota law. But I'm going to read you, well, I'll read you what the amendment says. An assisted living contract must not include a forced arbitration provision or any provision that precludes, limits, or delays the ability of a resident to take any civil action. So that tells you exactly what a forced arbitration provision will do. It'll preclude any civil action. The amendment also declares as void and unenforceable such a provision as contrary to public policy. And so members, for the protection of the residents who will have no other way to enforce their rights, I ask you to support the A7 amendment.
Discussion on the A7 amendment. Senator Housley.
Mr. President, Senator Latz, I am going to respectfully oppose this. This bill has been 2 years and, like I said, more than 500 hours by all of the stakeholders, and any change of language like that would violate the agreement that they've been working on for the past 2.5 years. So I would ask that members oppose this.
Further discussion. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Latz, thank you for bringing this before the Senate and allowing us to discuss the arbitration issue. And as you did point out, there is language. This language would replace the current Section 31, in which through the process of give and take and negotiation, at least some improvements were made to the arbitration requirements and standards in these particular contracts pertaining to assisted living facilities. And one of the items I think you didn't mention is that a facility must clearly and conspicuously disclose in writing any arbitration provision in the contract that precludes, limits, or delays the ability of a resident from taking a civil action. And of course, they're not allowed to choose a law from another state, an arbitration law from another state, or conduct that arbitration in another state, which is an improvement, but as you point out, not great, not perfect. There's a few other elements in the process of the give and take of negotiation that were regrettably lost, that would have been viewed as more favorable to consumers, to seniors in these facilities themselves. So the point of my comments is that this is a deal, and there are a lot of elements that aren't necessarily as I would have liked them to be, but there are a number of gains that we have made in a number of different areas with Senator Housley and advocates and other support in the concessions of industry interests. So this was one of the deal points that was a part of that negotiation and that conversation. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment. Senator Latz.
Mr. President, will Senator Housley yield for a question?
Senator Housley will yield. Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Housley, I seek some clarification on one of the provisions in the existing bill before us. It says that the contract must not include a choice of law or choice of venue provision. The choice of law, I understand you can't force a different state's laws onto this contract, but what is your understanding of the provision that says it could not be a choice of venue provision?
Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am going to ask Senate staff to clarify that for me. Mr. President, Senator Latz, what page is that?
Senator Latz will yield. Senator Latz.
Mr. President, Senator Housley, I'm looking at page 80, line 20.
Senator Housley.
Mr. President, Senator Latz, you said the venue?
Senator Latz.
Yes, Mr. President, perhaps I can ask the question a slightly different way to get to the point I'm trying to understand. Is there anything, Mr. President, Senator Housley, is there anything in this current language that would prohibit the facility from identifying a preferred arbitration organization through which all of the arbitrations for the contract must go?
Mr. President, Senator Mr. President, Senator Latz, I am not sure.
Mr. President,
Senator Latz.
I'm asking the question because I honestly am not sure myself either. That's why I'm trying to get the clarification. I guess here's the point that I'm going to make. And some of you may recall this issue in credit card agreements as well. For a long, long time, there were provisions in credit card agreements that not only said that all disputes must go through arbitration, which meant if you had a dispute over your bill, you couldn't sue the credit card company. You had to go to arbitration. It also specified that all of the arbitrations must be conducted through the National Arbitration Association. That was a particular arbitration association that was known for having arbitrators that favored or tended to favor the card company, the credit card company, rather than the consumer. And in fact, arbitrators that were hired or that were paid as a part of those arbitrations, they knew they would get a steady book of business as long as they continued to rule in general favorably toward the card companies that was sending all of their arbitration cases through that association. So I'm concerned here. For example, the American Arbitration Association is well known for being neutral. I mean, very neutral in the arbitrators that it selects and not having a predisposition or bias toward any particular party or another. And there are other arbitrators that are out there that are not part of any particular association. So what I'm trying to determine is whether or not under the language that is in this bill before us, will the facility be able to direct that all the arbitrations go toward an arbitration association or an arbitrator that they know is going to be generally favorable to the facility's interests and not to the residents' interests? So I don't know if there's anyone else in the chamber that could answer that question, but to me it's a pretty critical question.
Senator Housley will yield to that
Mr.
question.
President.
Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Latz. All of the actions have to take place in the state of Minnesota. They don't address who the arbitrator is. And this was language that was consumed by the consumer advocates. And this doesn't take place for 2 years. So if Senator Latz has some concerns going forward, we can address that.
Senator Latz.
Mr. President, Senator Housley, I'm particularly troubled. I'm glad that they'll take place in Minnesota, but there were a lot of arbitrators for credit card companies that lived and worked and arbitrated in Minnesota through the National Arbitration Association, not the AAA. Credit card consumers were at a big disadvantage as a result of that. So I think that definitely needs to be clarified or addressed. I'm glad that Senator Housley is open to addressing that should this bill become law in its current form. Even that said, I'm still deeply concerned that there's a provision in here which would eventually, in all likelihood for all consumers, would force them it's a forced arbitration clause. They'll have to go through arbitration, wouldn't have a right to sue, even for wrongful death. Members, I'm not going to mess up the stakeholder agreement on this. I think overall this is an important bill to become law. But what we've done is we've allowed the facilities with this language in here and something else I'll talk about after third reading. We've allowed the facilities to basically protect themselves financially, no matter how egregious their conduct may be, only subject to regulatory fines and not to anything else. I withdraw the A7 amendment.
Senator Latz withdraws the A7 amendment. Members, we're back on House File 90 as amended. Any further discussion? Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, I rise just to raise a couple concerns with this bill as it moves through the process. I don't have an amendment, but members, many are surprised to realize that we are, in this language, going to repeal a current small facilities exemption, and that exemption works with facilities of 12 and under from having a wake staff at night, as long as there's somebody designated in a way to have them available. And members, I rise to raise this concern because it's easy if you have a big facility to absorb the cost and defray it among 40 or 50 or 150 units. And what that is going to result in is needing to have these facilities located in bigger counties and bigger regional centers, and taking away the small facility option that currently exists under law. And so as we move forward with this new licensing across the state, which our state has resisted for years in the sense of let the facilities flourish and be built across our state based on market demands, and don't put them under licensing and regulatory schemes like nursing homes. Because our state has for years put moratoriums on more beds on nursing homes because generally as societal interests and public policy has been we want to leave aging at home a much more viable option and encourage more homey-type options for seniors as they get older. And the institution-type nursing home isn't the way the last few decades have gone, nor the public seems to be interested in more comfortable and new-styled senior living. But the concern is, as you add licensing, as you add more regulations, you also raise cost, and you also start turning facilities to look more and more like nursing homes. And we all know the cost of nursing homes is very expensive. There's a lot of expense that goes with it. There's a lot of labor. That's one of the biggest expenses that drives the cost of nursing homes up. And so as we move forward with licensing all assisted livings under this bill, we're going down that path. And one of the troubling aspects I have with this is in rural counties, You don't have the critical mass to have large facilities. And if you don't have larger facilities, you don't have the units to defray the cost, therefore raising the cost of the smaller facilities yet even more. And so counties like Traverse County and my district on the western edge of the state with just over 4,000 people in the county. That's 4,000 people just in the county. There's a lot of cities in the metro that's just some neighborhoods that have 4,000 people. But members, that is the difference in our state. And so I raise this concern, and it's a reason I cannot support this bill. While it's come a long ways for the bigger facilities, but it's, I think, been at the expense of leaving smaller facilities behind, as there's been such a momentum or push to try to come up with a stakeholder agreement. And members, I rise to raise this issue in support of trying to fix this as we go forward. Next year, I've turned a bill in dealing with this just today. I had an amendment yesterday in Finance. I talked to the author. I pulled it back knowing the tenuous nature of this bill. But I raise it so people voting on this realize that concern. It's a reason I cannot support this bill yet. But I also raise it so rural communities aren't left behind with the option, because the alternative is going to be, rather than having smaller facilities built in a rural county with less critical mass, is their seniors and parents and loved ones are going to have to move further away to find any facility that's licensed as an assisted living, because they're simply going to be built in the bigger towns and the regional centers, and they can have the critical mass to afford the cost of awake staff all through the night. And so it's disappointing to me that we're repealing that current statute that allows for that small facility exemption, and it's my hope we continue to work on fixing that, because there's a lot of rural communities, a lot of rural counties that will not see this option as likely if we just make it more and more expensive and more geared towards the larger facilities. And so, members, I raise this concern as this bill continues to move. Hopefully we could fix it yet before the end of session, but that window is closing, and I want to continue working on this with the providers and the advocates and all those involved if we can't have it fixed before this bill gets passed and signed into law, if it does.
Further discussion on House File 90. Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. President and members. I do want to stand up and express my concern about Article 3 under Consumer Protections, the 14 days before we notify the nursing homes. I'm going to speak for our rural Minnesota nursing homes, and certainly we've had some abuse in those nursing homes. I'm not going to say we haven't, but I do know of a particular incident that happened in the last year in one of the nursing homes in my district, and that was handled immediately upon the issue. And I'm not convinced that by waiting 14 days to notify our administrators of issues is the best route to go. I don't have a problem with the way it's set up, just that I think that not only besides the notifying ombudsman, you should be able to, that the administrator of the nursing home also ought to know about a camera that's being put in a room. I think if the end result is what we want to do is we want to have safer places for our elderly residents to be in nursing homes, we want to have safer nursing homes, and we want to have less people having problems, I think the thing is then is we want to cover all of our opportunities to make sure that we do that. And I think by eliminating the notification to the administrator of a nursing home when a camera is put in, I don't think that that's helping us. I think that if we were doing that in along with the other things, it would make more sense. So I am quite concerned. I'm very disappointed. I've talked to the author about this many times, and I'm very disappointed that we're ending up with 14 days before I notify our nursing homes. A lot of our nursing homes in rural Minnesota, I've had a lot of contact with them, a lot of calls from them, and they really kind of feel like this is a slap in the face that they're being told that they're not taking care of their employees, they're not training them properly, they're not doing this, that, and other things. And so I think it's unfortunate, and I hope when this bill finally gets back here that it comes back with a number of days that are acceptable, and that we are getting our nursing homes involved in right away when we put the cameras in.
Members, are there any other amendments that members have? Seeing none, the Secretary will give House File 90 its third reading.
House File Number 90, a bill for an act relating to health establishing consumer protections for residents of assisted living establishments.
Third reading. Final discussion on the bill. Senator Eakin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I rise in support of the bill, and I too would like to thank all the stakeholders who have worked so hard in reaching this agreement, and also thank Senator Housley and Senator Dibble and the other members of the Family Care and Aging Committee for the good work that they've done on this legislation. But I also want to thank, and I think it's important that we also do thank and recognize the great people who are working in our nursing homes and our long-term care facilities. And I can speak from personal experience about the wonderful work that they've done. My father also spent the last 6 years of his life in a nursing home suffering from dementia and Parkinson's. And I can tell you that the care that they provided for him was outstanding. And it's why it's so important to save the small rural nursing homes that provide that quality care. And I do think there's some, legitimate concerns that have been raised as far as how laws we pass here may affect some of our smaller nursing homes and long-term care facilities. But I think this is a good bill. I think there's a lot of very badly needed provisions in this bill, including, the termination of the termination provisions, the Bill of Rights, the licensure for assisted living, the additional FTEs for the Ombudsman's office, all critically important provisions that we need to pass. But I do think it's important to note as well that we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that we're going to fix the problem of ensuring good quality care for our seniors through regulation alone and through this bill alone. This is just a step in the direction of trying to provide that good quality care, ensuring that good quality care. This bill is an important piece of that, but if you think that we can regulate ourselves out of these problems, you're sadly mistaken. We need to ensure that we're providing the resources necessary for our long-term care facilities and providers to get the staff they need, to make sure that they're getting good quality staff that are well-trained, well-compensated, so once you get them, you keep them. These are issues that we need to continue working on as we move forward. And as I said, I think there's legitimate concerns about, we can't just focus on the regulatory side of things. You can actually go too far in that direction. I think there is a danger of overregulation that could chase good people out of the profession, chase good and lead to good facilities having to close their doors. So we always have to be careful of that as we move forward. The nursing home that took care of my father just closed this last fall in the small town of Twin Valley, my hometown, which was a major impact not just to those who needed the care that they were providing, but to the whole community because of what a big important role it plays as a major place of employment and as a place for the community, for people to see their loved ones. So this, I just say this because I think it's important that we look at the big picture as we're moving forward here. And sometimes I think we seem to think that we've fixed the problem. This is a piece of that fix, but it doesn't fix the problem of ensuring that everybody in this state, regardless of where they live, is going to receive the quality care they need when they need it. But I ask for members' support on this bill. Again, wonderful work that was done by the stakeholders and by the legislators, all of whom worked on this important piece of legislation. And I'm glad that we were able to get it done with good bipartisan support. Thank you.
Members, I have a handful of members on the list here. I'll call them in the order that they got my attention. Next on my list is Senator Abler.
Thanks, Mr. President, and I wish we had an hour to talk about this bill. It's a remarkable achievement that when people work together and they attempt to solve a really big problem, there was a big rush to get a bill done last year and it just didn't come together. And sometimes you take your time, add hours and hours and hours of good people doing work, it comes out to be amazing. And Senator Housley, I just commend you for your perseverance, and your partner in crime, Commissioner Malcolm, and so many others. I could list them all, but then we'd be here too late and then people want me to stop talking. But I just want to tell people, this is an example of something that goes right down here. Today we made a budget agreement, and it's a pretty good agreement. It's not what everybody would have wanted, but it's reasonable. It's going to serve Minnesota. This bill tonight is going to serve seniors excellently. The people who send their mom or grandma to a place can feel confident when this all gets worked through that there's going to be a standard of service, there's going to be quality services there, quality protections, the ability to know how she's doing, and so when you vote green on this, members, be proud. And to Minnesota, we know how to get stuff done here. We do it well. This is one of those examples, and well done, all the people who touched this thing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is a good bill. My journey in my medical career has taken me to at least a dozen nursing homes, and this bill is a balanced approach to trying to shine a bright light on problems that have emerged. That isn't to say that there's not a lot of wonderful, angelic, committed professional care taking place in nursing homes around Minnesota. But the fact of the matter is there are some horrific evidences of abuses that need to be addressed. In regards to Senator Dame's comments, I shared those same concerns. I thought, why in the world would we want to provide this opportunity for 14 days of observation? But the fact of the matter is, we've discussed this at committee level. I've talked this over with Senator Benson, Senator Rosen, Senator Housley, and the fact of the matter is that patients now can go ahead and do that same observation without any time limit. So what this bill actually says is, okay, 14 days, and you've got to make proper notification. That may not be the perfect way to do it, but it's a reasonable way to do it, and I don't think we should let better get in the way of good. It's time to act. This is one of those bills that incrementally has gotten better and better, and I think at the end of the day, it's going to improve things in Minnesota nursing homes without throwing anyone under the bus, and I thank Senator Housley for her work.
Final discussion on the bill, Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to be brief. When we first heard the issues with the Office of Health Facilities complaints early in 2017, we were aghast at what was happening. Through the period of time since those hearings took place, we have made remarkable progress. We have had the conversation, we have elevated the issue, illuminated it, and brought it out to the forefront. But the thing I want to point out most importantly is that this bill takes the approach that we needed to take from the very beginning, and that the object is to make the experience and the care that the residents receive better. This bill will do that. It will improve the care that the residents are receiving. And I also will add my applause to the stakeholders and the progress. I was involved in the negotiations in much of this, and to watch them step forward and try to come together, even though they came at it from different viewpoints and different objectives. I think that they came together to understand that the object of this bill is to improve care. And this bill will do that. Is it perfect? No. But we don't want perfection to impede progress. And this bill takes us a long way, and it also raises the conversations that we need to still have and leaves room for those improvements. So again, I want to congratulate Senator Housley and all the other people that worked on this for coming to a very fine balance of the competing and conflicting interests that everyone has. Thank you.
Final discussion on the bill, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too will be brief and wanted to say first thanks to the legislators and advocates and so who worked on this, but to wish that we could do more and recognize that's something for next year. The amendments that Senator Dibble tried for a private right of action a few weeks ago, and the forced arbitration issue that Senator Latz and others have mentioned are rights that we ought to make sure people have. This affects people at very vulnerable times in their life, and while many facilities do an excellent job, there's some who take advantage of people, but that's something for next year. The thing I wanted to say, though, is I think we got to give a lot of credit to a handful of people who had experienced tragedies in watching their own parents, who got together. Groups like Elder Voices came forward and were persistent, showing up time after time as volunteers, showing up to these meetings with Department of Health, with the legislators, with the facilities, and working out. If it hadn't been for them, I don't think we'd have such a good package. I think they deserve a ton of credit. But I think all together, I think we can be proud of what's been put together here and recognize there may be more work to do in the future.
Final discussion on the bill, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, I rise in support of this bill. And I thank all who have worked so diligently on this. And many of us have had, some will have, an experience with a loved one in some type of assisted living care or nursing home care or dementia care. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the things in this bill that I think are so helpful, and then just put a little pointer going forward. One of the things that I did not hear discussed was the licensure piece. And as someone who typically thinks that government tends to over-regulate and over-license, yet I support this licensure piece. One of the things we found, both on a personal level and also in serving my constituents, that is all too often, because we had this kind of convoluted Class F licensure system, which said there was housing and housing with services, it all too often provided a loophole for long-term care insurance companies to refuse to pay for the services that the policyholders thought they had been purchasing. And oftentimes it took calls into different insurance commissioners and different insurance company many levels up to get those things rectified. So I believe that this assisted living licensure, much like every other state has, will make it much easier for our constituents to actually get the benefits from the long-term care policies for which they have been paying. I think that's a big thing right there. And then, in fact, it was so disheartening to hear all those complaints that those who are most helpless and their loved ones would file those complaints and they would be thrown in the trash. And so I'm very thankful that we have a procedure for those. And then the last thing I would notice that I think is incredibly important is there's a provision in this bill that requires that when someone contracts with an assisted living facility for care of a loved one, they need to know right up front what services are provided and what services are not. All too often, people contract with an assisted living, they think they're going to get the care their loved one needs, only to find out as they get a few years into the disease that the place does not provide it. So I think that is a great provision. And just looking forward as that checklist is made up, one of the things, because it's not been determined yet what that will be, one of the things that will be incredibly helpful is if consumers know right up front if the assisted living facility or the assisted living facility with dementia care, are they going to have the ability to have a two-person transfer. That's significant. At the end stages of Alzheimer's, for example, it's part of the disease needing two people to transfer, and yet some don't have it, and then the only option is a nursing home, which is quite much more expensive. So I just tip my hat to Senator Housley. I thank her for working through the myriad of issues and concerns and coming to do so in a way that stakeholders were involved. I think this is going to be good for our Minnesota seniors, and look forward to seeing this enacted.
Final comments on the bill, Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I too want to rise in support of this bill and also add my voice of thanks to everyone who worked so hard on this bill. But I especially want, and this is a great moment for the Senate, this is a great moment for the legislature, and we should be very, very proud. This has been the product of a lot of hard work over a couple of years, but I especially wanted, as Senator Marty and others did, just highlight the fact that this actually comes after many more years preceding the couple of 2-3 years that we've been aware of and working hard on this subject on the part of parents and senior citizens themselves who have been working to bring attention to what was going on in a lot of these facilities, both nursing homes, already licensed facilities, as well as the more community-based housing with services, assisted living facilities that currently aren't subject to licensure. I'll never forget a conversation I had around my table in my office with constituents of mine who also happened to be some of the founding members of Elder Voice Family Advocates, telling me their stories through tears about what their parents had experienced, stories of tragedy and pain and suffering that were extremely disturbing to hear about, and their extremely frustrating efforts over the course of a long, long time to have those problems addressed in real time, to be rebuffed by facility managers, and to have no outlet and no response, and to run into a wall of silence when turning to elected officials and public agencies and enforcement agencies and the like. And it was an exasperating and overwhelming conversation, and I didn't even know where to begin to try to help them, because it was so just so huge, and clearly the system that they were describing just wasn't in place to respond to them. It just wasn't in place. Fortunately, it happened just a couple of weeks before the deadline of our submittals for our legislative auditor analysis ideas was due, and so we got busy, and Senator Housley helped promote that idea as well, and the legislative auditor took it up, and I think it got the most number of votes. I think you all voted for that idea, and in the House there was some organizing as well, and the legislative auditor started its analysis. In the meantime, the Star Tribune started paying attention, and of course we're familiar with the series of stories by the Star Tribune reporter Chris Sears, and then the governor got involved after that series was published, and some folks came together in a discussion around making recommendations. Senator Housley then convened a work group, and then we started on down the path of crafting legislation. Unfortunately, that legislation didn't pass last biennium, but by that time, Commissioner Malcolm was in place, and she continued to convene folks and bring them together, and the product of that were the bills that I introduced, bills that Senator Housley introduced, and we're standing here today, and this is a great moment, and I'm extremely happy about that. But I did want to take just 1 second to just to remember those stories, and I would encourage folks to take a look at the Elder Voice Family Advocates. I think if they hadn't done their organizing and grassroots work of really talking to people about what those experiences were, what their parents went through, and what the response of the system was, then we wouldn't be standing here today. And they have on their website a number of victim abuse reports and case studies of death after neglect, and death from untreated emergency conditions, sexual assault, amputation of legs, financial exploitation, physical and emotional abuse, and those stories go on, and they're very, very hard to hear and very, very hard to stomach. But in some way, I am just so amazed at the courage of families, even after all of this has happened, and they would much rather put these experiences behind them to just persist and move forward and try to make life better for those who follow. It bears mentioning that a number of the findings of the legislative auditor to the Department of Health never were enacted in law as directive. Some were, but many weren't, because the Commissioner of Health just went ahead and started down the path of implementing a number of those recommendations. At the time of the report, it was found that 24,000 reports had come in 2017, and only 5% of those reports had been triaged sufficiently that an on-site investigation could be conducted. There was no quality control measures, no way to inform family members or vulnerable adults what was happening with those investigations, no management of data, no ability to do much with that data. So even though we didn't direct the Commissioner to do these things, they have now dealt with the entire backlog. Still 400 reports come in a week, but they have a better ability to manage with them. And a great deal of some part of the funding that's coming in, and thank you, Senator Rosen, for fully funding this package, and that's fantastic. And some portion of this funding, well, not Senator Rosen, all of us, of course, but Senator Rosen kind of holds the keys to the cookie jar around here. And so we appreciate that. And that's going to bolster the work and the staffing and the quality control and the systems and technology improvements that the Department of Health actually needs. And so I'm grateful for that as well. And just finally, I'll wrap up by saying, some of these items that are in the bill, it's a very comprehensive bill. It's about 150 pages long, but it does go far to enact consumer protections, as Senator Housley presented in her opening remarks, the protections from arbitrary termination, compensation in the interim for harm, for maltreatment, the Assisted Living Bill of Rights, even though we don't have the right of private action. That's regrettable. We did strengthen the Assisted Living Bill of Rights. Likewise, we didn't pursue inclusion of the right of survivorship so that a claim can continue after someone dies, but we do have many other provisions that strengthen consumer protections. The right to electronic monitoring, we talked, of course, that actually at one time we thought was going to be the big solution, the granny cams. And prohibition of retaliation, a big point of contention, was resolved. And so I look forward to the next couple of years as we get underway with the very public and collaborative process of establishing licensure, the 2 tiers of licensure for assisted living facilities. I think the points raised by Senator Westrom and Senator Eakin about hitting that sweet spot. There's going to be a lot of things we learn as this bill goes into effect. But it is a huge step forward and a credit, and I think probably the feel-good bill of the year, so I'm very proud of our work. I especially want to thank, of course, by name, there are many, many people who warrant thanks, but the folks that I work the most closely with, my posse, if you will, Chris Sundberg, Kay Bromelkamp, Gene Peters, and Ann Sterner from Elder Voice Family Advocates, and Ron Elwood from Legal Services, and Mary Jo George and Maureen O'Connell from AARP, and of course Liam Monahan, I think, was already thanked, but we tortured him and tormented him regularly, Senate Council, with lots and lots and lots and lots of legal writing and lots of changes and lots of rush orders and that sort of thing. So thank you very much, members. I'll be voting green, and I encourage others to as well.
Members, there are still several people on the list. Next for final comments is Senator Latz.
Mr. President, members, I've already highlighted my concern. Well, first of all, let me congratulate Senator Housley. I know this has been a labor of great importance to her, and it's quite an accomplishment to have pulled all of this together. And my commendation to Senator Housley for that, and for all the others that have been involved in putting this together. I do think overall it's a bill that's worthy of becoming law, because it does bring us a lot of advances in protecting the residents, which to me is the ultimate purpose of this bill. I've already highlighted my concern about the ability for facilities, which I think they will all do, to put forced arbitration clauses in their contracts. And the fact is, it leaves no consumer choice in that regard, because any consumer that is looking for an assisted living facility for their loved one is first going to be looking for a place that has an open bed and one that they think has a decent quality of care. They're probably not going to read the contract all that carefully. If they do, they're not going to understand what an arbitration provision is. And if they understand it a little bit, they're not going to recognize the significance or importance of that provision. So it really is ultimately up to the legislature to protect the consumers in that regard, because in that kind of a provision, the consumers can't protect themselves. But there is another provision that's missing here also, which was originally part of the discussions, and that is what should have been here, which is a private right of action. The ability of an individual to bring a lawsuit against a facility which they believe has negligently or grossly negligently caused them harm, or even intentionally caused them harm. There's no private right of action allowed in the statute here. I want to signify to the stakeholders that my vote in favor of this bill does not signify my acquiescence to this part of the stakeholder agreement. And I will continue to fight to provide a statutory private right of action in these kinds of situations. What happens now is facilities will be able to completely avoid private accountability. They will be able to avoid going to court and having a jury decide whether or not they were negligent in the care that they gave and thereby causing damages. And they will avoid having a jury determine the amount of damages that were caused. There are limitations on the other safety provisions which are in this bill, essentially the regulatory structure. Now, it's great that we're doing it. There's going to be the ability to pull the license of a facility, which won't happen except in the most egregious of situations, and there will be the ability to fine a facility some amount. And that fine is not going to be anywhere near the level of accountability for most facilities that the potential for a lawsuit and a jury verdict would be. And frankly, the enforcement by the regulatory agency, no matter the terrific intention of the existing commissioner, will be subject to two main things. One is the regulatory resources that the enforcing department has available to it, and the will of the agency head to take aggressive enforcement action or appropriate enforcement action. The resources will be subject to the vagaries of our funding process. And there are many of us who are on the floor here today that when we look at even the budget agreement that was reached today, look through that and see areas where we believe that funding is going to be woefully lacking, where the agencies need more resources to do their jobs. They aren't going to get the resources that they need to do their jobs, to regulate effectively, to investigate complaints. I'm thinking in particular, one concern about the Department of Human Rights, but there are plenty of other agencies that are going to be in exactly the same situation. The Department of Commerce has been seeking staff to improve their regulatory ability as well for a long time. And they're going to be stuck with whatever the funding is through our funding and budgetary process. If they don't have the people, they don't have the resources, they will not be able to investigate the complaints, or not all of the complaints, certainly, let alone make decisions about what appropriate accountability measures, license suspension, fines, etc., would be right for the circumstances. The other has to do with the will of the regulating agency. We have a Commissioner of Health today who is very intent on investigating complaints about level of care, about violations of licensing requirements, and I'm certain will take appropriate and objective action where necessary to enforce the laws. But there may come a time when we have, and this has happened in other levels of government, there may come a time when we have an agency head that comes directly out of the industry that they are going to be regulating. An agency head who may have run a multi-million-dollar assisted living facility company or nursing home company. And they will come into that regulatory position with a very distinct bias to protect the interests of the nursing home companies, the assisted living facility companies and operators. And I fear that they will back off on regulatory aggressiveness to make sure that the laws and the licensing standards are enforced. Without a private right of action, the health and safety of the residents of the assisted living facilities, where you have, I'm not saying most operations are very good and most staff are very well-meaning, but we did see in the past, one thing that generated this whole effort here today were levels of complaints about services that were provided or levels of care that were not provided. There will come a time where we're going to wish that we had the ability to bring private lawsuits against some of these multi-million-dollar companies that answer to the bottom line more than anything else. So, members, this is a significant void in this bill. And while I'm going to vote for the bill, I'm going to continue to find a way, try to find a way, to make sure that all of the consumers, all of the residents of these facilities have the ability to bring lawsuits and are not bound by arbitrary or by forced arbitration provisions to hold those facilities accountable in the absence of the ability, which I think there's no way a regulatory structure is going to be good enough to capture all of the accountability that's necessary. Thank you.
Final comments on House File 90, Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, I just want to spend the next 30 minutes talking about how important this last 2 years of hearing. And no, seriously, Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Housley and the lead, Senator Eakin. You know, when we see a series around us of partisanship, brinkmanship, and finger-pointing, this committee set the politics aside, and it was really an amazing couple of years to have real discussions. And like one Senator Ralph would say, you know, we get down that rabbit's hole and we want to talk about reasonable, and to have that kind of deep commitment and communication from everybody around that table was pretty amazing. And it reminded me of what Congressman Ramstad used to say, health and human services and education, leave your ego outside the door and let's talk about this from a pragmatic and a non-partisanship way. And so, Senator Housley, thank you for leaving that door open, because you were able to create, there's a delicate balance in the consensus provisions that are in this bill, and it's important that we see that. And that was a lot of work to get to that. Yeah, we got a lot of work to do going on. And one thing that we have to do is to celebrate the fact that there's going to be some robust oversight and strong consumer protections. In the 2 years of being in the committee, my wife's mother was in a nursing home for 4 years, and my wife Yvette would go every day, would drive 40 miles just to go see her, because of the fact she wanted to make sure that her care was being taken care of on a daily basis, because there was really no oversight for her back then. And you know, I think during that whole time I kept thinking about what my wife would come home and talk to me about, and you know, this really gives a little peace of mind for folks like Yvette and others out there, because, you know, we've come a long way in preventing and addressing the abuse and neglect of seniors in our long-term facilities, and I think that's important for us to take a look at. Consumers and families can't wait any longer. Thank you for doing this. And you know, every other state has licensing when it comes to assisted living facilities, and it's thriving. It's time that Minnesota joins them. So members, please, let's take note on how we can set our politics aside and get something done that's right for Minnesota. This is the Minnesota way, and this is what we're doing today. So thank you again, Senator Housley, for keeping that spirit alive, and thank you, Senator Eakin, for being our lead on this, and together let's keep doing what we need to be doing for our elderly in the state of Minnesota.
Final comments on the bill, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to lend my thank you also to Senator Housley and the work that she has done. It's been a real labor of love, I know, for her and for all of us, because we all share in the sense that we have parents and loved ones that this really matters to. But not just for that, also say thank you to Commissioner Malcolm. She stepped in at a time where things are pretty rough, but she was willing and able and took the time to lend an able effort towards that work and was a very important component of that, and great appreciation for her as a commissioner and her working with stakeholders and the legislature. To the Office of the Legislative Auditor, thank you to Mr. Nobles and his staff who took on a very special part of this project in doing the work that we in the legislature asked him to do, and his results are part of this legislation. Thank you to all the staff who behind the scenes do so much work, but most of all, thank you to the families who worked so hard, who went through so many things to be able to say, we want to make a change for themselves and for others. One of the things I think of sometimes in these situations that we need trust. Trust is a very hard thing to come by. One of the things that's important is to not have blind trust, to have open-eyed trust. It's very important right now. Sometimes we have situations where we need to have our loved ones in a facility. You don't need to have blind trust. You can have open-eyed trust. You can read the language. As a matter of fact, I have a copy right here of House File 90. I'd encourage every single one of you. It doesn't do any good if we pass all these laws. A lot of things are really good, but if you don't know them, if you don't know your rights, kind of like the Constitution, if you don't know it, how can it be a tool that you can use in living your life and the freedom we have in this country? So you need to know these laws, not through blind trust, but through open eyes. Just to mention, we did have laws before for assisted living, 12 pages of laws, contracts, rights, a whole variety of things that were in here, commissioner authority to cease and desist for any facility that was not doing things right. But I do think that in these 156 pages, there was a great deal more detail added to it that I think will be helpful to be more specific, to be more defined, to be more clear. And I appreciate all of that. But nonetheless, as usual here in the legislature, we do our very best. We do everything that we can. But I think we're going to be back again next year. I think we've heard a few things that we may work on next year. But to this point in our legislative day, this is good work, well done by so many, and we thank you very much.
Final comments on the bill, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too would like to stand and give great thanks to Senator Housley and all the other legislators in this chamber for their outstanding work on this bill that has been a long time coming and is something of great pride by all the people that are on this list. If you have a chance, members, take a look at who signed this letter and who participated in this. But I especially want to call out Commissioner Malcolm. And in my 17 years, I've never seen a commissioner who has been so devoted and dedicated and diligent and tenacious about an issue, and she really rolled up her sleeves and she gave it her best, and she came out with a very good product. So her and her team deserve a special shout out on this. And also the people in this chamber that had a part of this bill, thank you so much, and you know who they are. But I especially want to thank all the workers that assist our elderly throughout Minnesota, because they do it for the love of our elderly. They don't do it for the pay or the benefits, as we all know. And in greater Minnesota, these workers are our neighbors, and you know that they care for those elderly people, that you know they know them, they probably grew up with them. And so sometimes when I looked at this bill, I thought it could have been a little punitive on addressing the entire industry and throwing it into one bunch. Well, that's not very fair. There are some bad players. We're addressing it. We're getting some uniformity. We want to make sure that this bill is not punitive, that it's just in the right direction when it comes to licensing and addressing the needs that the OLA report did address to us. And I think it's a very, very good step in that direction. And yes, there will be adjustments going forward. And yes, this is worth the investment. And it's a very expensive bill, members, but it is worth the investment. So I just want to say I'm very proud of the long-term industry and the facilities that I serve in my district. I'm very, very proud of them. But I also want to just say that I support Senator Westrum's concerns and Senator Dame's concerns about the electronic monitoring, and that has still been something I'm going to watch very closely in the future to make sure that we do not adjust it too much to jeopardize these small facilities and these facilities in Greater Minnesota that do not have the resources going forward. So, members, we should all step back and just thank each other for the hard work, and again, thank you, Senator Housley, for being tenacious also.
Final comments on the bill, Senator Ruud.
Mr. President, in 2016, when we reorganized this body, Senator Housley insisted on creating a long-term and aging committee. We hadn't had one before, but realizing that we have this gray tsunami coming towards us, we thought it was very important to do that. So what a difference we have made, all of us in the state of Minnesota, and what a privilege for me to serve on that committee and be a part of this bill. And one of the reasons it's so important is because I look around this room, and I know so many of us, and maybe it's our age in this room, have taken our parents and our loved ones down the journey. And so we brought to this committee our personal experiences, and it really made a difference. And there was a lot of tears in that committee. It's hard to sit there and listen to the stories that we listen to day after day, and knowing that we had our own experiences to draw on also. And one of the things that we did was we went around the state and had listening sessions, and those were hard too, because this is an issue that is all around the state of Minnesota. And in Brainerd, we had a listening session, and had a young man, Jackson Purefirst, you all know his uncle, Clarence, called me and said, you know, I have 2 grandmas in a nursing home, and I'd like to go to the listening session with you. Would you take me? And so I picked Jackson up from school, and he went to the listening session. And he was so moved by that he wrote an essay on how we should take care of our elders. And he sent it to President Trump. And Jackson won the essay contest with that letter on elder care and won a trip to Washington, D.C. And it's something that he will have with him for the rest of his life, an experience of a lifetime, because we made a difference across the state of Minnesota with this. And so I thank everyone who has been working on this and poured their heart and their soul into this bill. And we did make a difference, and we do make a difference. So thank you.
Members, are there any final comments on House File 90? Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm thinking everybody in the chamber would like to be on our Aging and Long-Term Care Committee, because we do have a lot of fun and a lot of great conversation, in addition to some tears. So many thank yous that I said earlier, but I forgot to thank all of the great caregivers that are in our facilities. When you are bringing your loved one to their new home, whether it be an assisted living or a nursing home, those folks that take care of our loved ones really, really are special people. But when you get some bad eggs, we need to protect our most vulnerable and our seniors, and that's exactly what we heard during committee. And with this, in the next decade, there's going to be more people over the age of 65 in the state of Minnesota than there is under the age of 18. And we do need to protect them, and that's what this bill does. It has a lot of consumer protections, from the cameras in the room to preventing retaliation to terminations. And also the assisted living licensure is huge. We can't let better get in the way of good. I've heard some concerns here on the floor that we will be addressing. I promised Senator Westrum we would look at what his concerns were, and some of the others that were brought up here today. We will be looking at in the interim. It's overwhelming at that time in your life when you have to move your loved one to their new place, and it's an emotional time. This is an emotional issue, and being there and looking through all the paperwork, it's confusing, and you're not sure what your rights are. And what this bill does is it makes it very, very clear. In 150 pages, it's very clear. And this this truly is the way government is supposed to work. You have the letter on your desk with all of the associations and organizations that support this bill and all of the hours that these stakeholders have put in, is how government is supposed to work. Come to a consensus and agreement to help folks here in Minnesota. So again, I want to thank everyone for the kind words and all of the support and the work that you have given us in getting this done. So thank you, and I encourage a green vote. Thank you.
Members, we're on final passage of House File 90 as amended. See no further discussion. The Secretary will take the roll. All members having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.